Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you to VAIA for organizing these nice peers and prompt sessions. So my name is Maxime Van Haeverbeke. I'm a postdoctoral researcher in mathematical modeling at the Faculty of Bioscience Engineering at Ghent University. And today I'll be discussing in this short webinar one of the recent big AI hypes and trends called vibe coding. So the goal of this little talk is actually um, to introduce people who are not familiar with programming to these powerful tools that, if used correctly, could actually help in higher education, in teaching, and but also in research or for studying help. So yes, without further ado, we will start with the origin of the term vibe coding. So the term vibe coding goes back to February of this year. It's quite a new term, and it's actually an ex post by Tesla's former director of AI, Andrej Karpathy. So he had a long post, but I think the quintessential part is displayed here. So there's a new kind of coding I call vibe coding, where you fully give in to the vibes, embrace exponentials, and forget that the code even exists. So I think an intuitive way to figure out what vibe coding actually is to compare it with what I might already call the traditional ChatGPT. So in ChatGPT, you have a chat window and you have a conversational interaction with a large language model with step-by-step reasoning. So you ask a question, you get an answer, but it doesn't iterate too much over its answer. And there's also some context you can provide. You can add files like what's in my Microsoft Word file or whatever. But this context is quite limited. It doesn't have a lot of access. And there's only so much that can be answered based on this limited context. And then due to the step-by-step reasoning, there's not a lot of iteration over code, for example, that ChatGPT might provide. On the other hand, we have vibe coding, or actually, I personally prefer the term agentic programming because it's more general, and vibe coding is not only for people who don't know how to code, and actually the most powerful vibe coding applications are made by people who also understand what's going on and can figure out what the weaknesses are of the model and how to mitigate them. But in vibe coding, we have direct code manipulation. So the agent, the large language model can actually directly edit and write a lot of code, make new files, make new directories to create your application of choice. And it also iterates quickly, so it writes code and then it figure out, it tries to run the code, it figure out there's errors, and then it corrects itself, and that way there's a lot more happening behind the screens. At the same time, it's also state aware. So your vibe programming application or programming environment, they're integrated. And actually, the large language model can access all the files you give it access to and immediately see, for example, if you already have some code and you'd like to make edits to it or let it expand or add new functionality. That's where the large language models in vibe coding applications shine. So it's also execution oriented. You can ask questions, but oftentimes you need to emphasize that you don't want to implement anything, or you need to go to ask mode rather than agent mode, because it will always want to create things based on the prompts that you give it. So I didn't really have a big self-introduction slide, but I thought we could immediately head into a hands-on application of vibe coding by means of my self-introduction. So here I've opened 3 tabs in my browser, so 3 different vibe coding tools. And I don't pay for these tools, but I'm just gonna use the daily free credits that you get for them to show how they work in general. So as we know, there's a lot you can figure out about a person based on what's available on the web, sometimes more than you might like. Um, and at the same time, I noticed recently that I don't really have a good personal website. So why not use this webinar to create a personal website for myself using vibe coding? So here I'll create a prompt, a very simple prompt to see how these tools work. I haven't used these specific tools, so it'll also be an interesting experiment to compare what kind of results the three tools will provide. So here my prompt, create a personal website for Maxime Van Haeverbeke based on what we can find about him online. Okay, so this simple prompt, I'll copy it and I'll hit enter. So here you see this specific tool called Lovable. It's already started thinking. So at the same time, I'll also add the same prompt in another. Okay, this just lets me fill in some stuff first before I can start. So here, okay, I've got the second agent working. And then another one, Replit, another famous vibe coding tool. So now we've got our three agents, our three large language model agents working for us. And yeah, we'll let them take their time and build our app for us. And while we're waiting, I'd like to gauge a little bit, see what the audience's background is. So I've got a little poll. Just to see what I should emphasize for the rest of the presentation. So this poll is about what your background is in programming. So have you programmed before? Maybe you follow the course, or maybe you're already a very experienced programmer. So yeah, feel free to fill in the poll and then we'll see the answers later. In the meantime, I can also go over, so it's always interesting for these new hypes and trends. So this is a trend from this year to take a look at Google Trends. So this is a Google Trends plot where the interest is on the vertical axis and the time on the horizontal axis to see at what times interest peaked in the term vibe coding and when it started to go down. Okay, so first in February, somewhere at the end of February, we have Andrei Karpathy, who coins the term in his famous X post. And then afterwards, we see a big peak. So this term vibe coding hits the mainstream. Everyone thinks, oh, it's so amazing. We can create apps. We can do whatever we want without even having to be able to program. So then we have this peak over here in April. But of course, vibe coding, it's not perfect. It's even become a bit of a controversial topic. So there's the disillusionment phase afterwards from April to July, where people notice, there are some security risks and sometimes things go terribly wrong when people try to make vibe coding applications, including payments and personal details about people. And also we notice that sometimes it's very a rough debugging process where the app never really manages to do what you want it to do, or you need to spend a lot of time to finally convince the large language model to implement the app that you'd like to have. But then later, at the end of the summer, there's another peak because so JavaScript is one of the most used programming languages. It's used for all kinds of web interactivity, but there's another programming language similar to JavaScript that is less error prone. So it makes less errors because you have to be more specific while programming in that programming language. And that's why AI models that make a lot of those mistakes, they really benefited from this other programming language. And then we noticed that a lot like TypeScript, this other programming language actually started to surpass JavaScript, and that's purely due to the large language models. So here we see another peak, and later on there's another peak for new tools. There's always new tools being released, even very recently. And then recently in November, the Collins Dictionary also made vibe coding the word of the year for 2025, together with even more new tools and new developments being released. So now we'll take a look at what our vibe coding experiment resulted in. So here we see uh, the Lovable tools, tool called Lovable, which website it made for me. So here we see it's a pretty nice looking website. I didn't have to program a single line of it myself. And I think it's more or less accurate, but now and then there's some mistakes. For example, I don't do anything related to peptide discovery. But here you see it has working LinkedIn, then even has some featured research, but this is not my research paper. So it already made a nice layout, but here I think in this example, it didn't do a really good job content-wise. I could, for example, do a follow-up prompt asking like, um, add my correct publication list using Google Scholar, and then it would probably solve this issue. Then let's take a look at what Bolt, so another tool, created. A quite similar looking website, general layout. I think it also did a reasonable job layout-wise, so it's nice. It's also this code generated by the vibe coding tools. It can always be iterated on and adjusted until you get exactly what you want, or you could already add a template or examples, show examples of what kind of website you'd like. Here we see has links to Google Scholar, ResearchGate that if I click that they'll work. Uh, So yeah, we'll keep it with those. Here's another one. This one didn't really do a good job. So I think we can conclude that it already creates quite nice results. So we get a nice website that we could iterate on, and it could result in a nice looking personal website as an example application. So here I demonstrated a few of the common tools, but recently there's been a huge slew of new tools. Everyone is jumping on this topic, and there's several companies that are evaluated at over $1 billion US dollars within a rather short time. So these companies are also growing very quickly. Also, we have just yesterday, Google released its own tool, so I think I'm quite interested to see what this one will do. Google Anti-Gravity, and it's just always evolving very quickly. So, of course, vibe coding does remain quite a controversial topic. By the way, I see that most of the viewership doesn't have programming experience, so I'll make sure that the remainder of the presentation reflects this a little bit. So vibe coding is a controversial topic, and here's a quote by Marcus Borg. Vibe coding is taking the world by storm, and as with any good storm, some people frown and stay inside, while others let the wind carry them away. So it's important to find a balance. and to know what the limitations are. So arguments for vibe coding, I'd say it's a democratizing force for non-technical visionaries. So if you just have an idea, you can quickly get like a working app or a website without having to know anything in advance. So that's quite powerful. And it's also, you can quickly make prototypes of your idea that don't have to be perfect, but it's enough that you can communicate them with your colleagues. And if used correctly, it can be very effective. And there have been some very fancy working applications with vibe coding, actually. And of course, it's also fun, and there's no need to always take it too seriously. And the tools are evolving quickly. On the other hand, of course, as with all these large language models, there's some sustainability issues. Like one vibe coding session might be the sustainability equivalent of throwing out a half-liter bottle of water. So I think that that's a good imagery to show that there's some sustainability issues with large language models. And also, so they might impact the learning process of junior programmers, although they might also learn with the right mindset to observe what the large language models do. Then there's all the issues of hallucinations of the model, hard to scale, some security risks, and high-stake applications. You might think twice before trying to make them in a one-shot prompt with vibe coding. But then there's also new technologies that try to mitigate these issues. For example, recently there's been a lot of focus on something called model context protocols, which actually gives the models more context to create more accurate results. So there's a lot of advanced things you can do to solve these issues. So here, so this presentation will be online if you want to check later, but here's a whole bunch of some of the drama or issues that happened before with various of the vibe coding tool companies. Also, there's lots of large language models themselves that you can select often. You can choose which model you use for your vibe coding application. And sometimes, so yeah, this is slightly more advanced, but there's this website where you can see all of the models and what they're good at. So if you want to choose yourself, select which model you want to use for which application. The large model arena, the LM arena, it would be a good resource for that. So how can vibe coding benefit us in higher education? Here, I just listed a few applications that I could think of that might be useful. So we could use vibe coding as a teacher. You could use vibe coding to create helper tools, to digitally um, evaluate. So helper tools for grading and evaluation. For example, if there are certain terms that you want to see in an answer, you can highlight them already and afterwards be more quick with your correction work. And at the same time, you can also make stunning visuals and nice illustrations and simulations for certain concepts that you'd like to teach. And also you can make smart group generators for group work if there are certain constraints, like you want to uh, not you don't want all the best students to be in one group, like or some constraints you might think of as a teacher. You can also make an app for that, or bulk feedback based on scores on some questions of exams, without having to write many emails. Then in research, there's also low stakes prototyping. You can quickly try some tools that you're not really familiar with. At the same time, also, it can be used for software, making software for your tools that you make during your research, or just for general language checking software that I've seen my colleagues make successful vibe coding apps for. And then for learning itself, you can make some fun gamified apps. For example, my hobby is language learning, and that's actually also my main application of vibe coding itself, is to just make some tools that make the learning process more fun and to basically drill the grammar or vocabulary. And also, you can learn programming also through the observation of what a large language model does when you wanted to create a certain app or something. Could also be a fun way to learn. So these advanced tips and tricks, I won't go over them, but you can check the slides later. They'll become available if you're interested in learning more about how to make a good vibe coding application. And then there's also a lot of examples. So there's a website, vibecodinglist.com, that shows a lot of cool things that people made. And here are some examples, like people made even like a 3D multiplayer flight simulator from scratch just through prompts and vibe coding. It's all possible. And then Andrei Karpathy even made this menu to images where you can immediately scan a menu and see the images of the food, and then also checking the air quality apps for if you want to go traveling. So there are many different, your imagination is the limit to all. And for more interesting projects or inspiration, you can always check this website, vibecodinglist.com. So in conclusion, vibe coding, it can be a useful and fun tool for use in higher education. But of course, users must remain aware and cautious about its limitations and also always stay critical. So that's it. And I also added here my email address. If you might have a cool vibe coding application that you'd like to discuss with me, then feel free to send me an email. So thank you.